This year's letter from the chairman, written by the creator of Star Citizen, Chris Roberts, to speak on the future of the game, unexpectedly arrived just yesterday. And in it, he described and recalled the progress of last year, talked about the recent progress with testing server meshing that just happened last weekend, as well as plans for future testing that's also really exciting, explained some recent departures and layoffs, and finally talked about Star Citizen 1.0, an actual full commercial release. So in a moment, I'll summarize his key points for you in addition to giving you some missing context to bring you up to speed. And if by the end you think I did a good job and deserve it, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to see more informative Star Citizen content like this. But one kind of information maybe you don't want to get out into the open is your own personal information, which is something that Incogni, the sponsor of today's video, can help you with. You probably already know that whenever you do something online, there's a huge number of companies that collect your information. Stuff like your address, social security number, your employment history, etc. But what you might not know is that they buy, sell, and trade that info. Some of those companies use that information to do things like adjust your credit score, and others for more nefarious purposes. And worst of all, if any of those companies get hacked, which can happen quite frequently, your identity could be at risk, which is very likely what happened to me a couple years ago when my identity was stolen. That's where Incogni can help. There are laws that allow you to force those companies to delete your data, and Incogni knows exactly how to use them. Their service automatically reaches out and applies the appropriate law and language to get them to remove the information. I just signed up and found out that there were over 90 companies with my personal information, so no wonder I keep getting invited to join annoying scam investor groups. So if you want to be just a bit more sure that your personal information isn't getting into the wrong hands, or if maybe you just want to stop a few of those annoying spam emails, you can get your personal data off the internet today with Incogni. Just head on over to incogni.com/morphologist and use my code morphologist to get 60% off an Incogni purchase. And don't worry, if you don't like it, you can always take advantage of their 30-day money-back guarantee. Again, that's incogni.com/morphologist and use code morphologist to get 60% off your order. Since there's a lot of content in this letter, I've elected to skip the 2023 recap, but if you want to read the whole thing, I'll leave a link in the description to the letter for you below. But just so you have a brief overview, he talked about the release of PES in 3.18 that enabled the move to server meshing, acknowledging that there were some bumps along the way for PES, and how great CitizenCon was last year with their announcement of moving Squadron 42 to feature complete. After the section reflecting on 2023, Chris then moved on to talk about the coming year and moving towards 4.0 Pyro and server meshing. But Chris also began the letter by confirming that the new Manchester CitizenCon this year would indeed share more information on Squadron 42 as many of us had guessed. Conspicuously though, there was no mention here of a release, but I wouldn't expect to hear one if there would be one, so that's really not a big sign of much. I suspect that they might not even know yet though what the date would be and may be looking more at a release window as opposed to a firm date. So I still think we can expect to hear something about a release window, if not a release date at this year's CitizenCon. Afterward though, he goes into the very exciting recent news of them finally being able to accomplish a test where a player was able to successfully jump using server meshing and their jump gate tech to go from one server to the next, from Stanton to Pyro, and congratulates Evocati member Mr. Trash for this first accomplishment. Congratulations, man, that's crazy. He also notes that they were able to achieve 350 concurrent players in this closed test for Evocati members. This is this closed test of players who don't work for CIG, which was a big step up from the current 100 player cap, but it's only a step along the way to a much bigger play environment. He then invites Benoit, the head of the team working on server meshing, to speak a bit on the subject. Benoit then reflects on 2023 and their progress, revealing that the replication layer will make its way into the next patch 3.23 and will transform the current experience from hard 30K disconnects to a more graceful recovery where players can continue to play the game with few hitches. He then goes on to confirm what I already suspected, that server meshing would officially release with 4.0 alongside the star system Pyro and would enjoy a step up in player cap. But then Benoit revealed that they would be doing more server meshing testing in the coming weeks and months, with tests focusing on multiple configurations, such as the version where they're going to do multiple game servers running a single solar system. In other words, breaking them down into planets, moons, and landing zones. This, in my view, will be a massive step forward where server meshing may potentially begin to solve one of the biggest issues that's plagued the game since the PU first opened: poor server performance. To be clear here though, this is something that I hope will be a result and not something that Benoit confirmed would be the case. Chris then returned to stress that this is an inflection point for the game. They are about to realize their huge number goal for Star Citizen single shards and will eventually reach that seamless, cosmically vast environment that all of us want to see. Star Citizen, he then goes on to say, will enjoy its best year yet in 2024. Here he explains how their transitioning of teams from the feature-complete Squadron 42 to Star Citizen will also yield more acceleration and polish of features coming in from Squadron 42, and of course will add to the momentum of getting Star Citizen to its own finish line. First though, before we're going into Star Citizen 1.0, Chris talked about the layoffs that were first reported in a number of news outlets towards the end of last year and at the beginning of this year. He did this though in a kind of indirect way, not using the word layoffs. He explained that he had now moved to Austin, Texas in order to be closer with the rest of the teams in the world so that their time zones could more easily align so they could coordinate better with all the studios. However, as part of this, he says that the Los Angeles studio would be reduced, and mentioned that some of that team would be asked to move to Manchester or possibly Austin and Montreal. But I want to stress that first part, to move to Manchester, because this is likely what caused a lot of people to depart from CIG. Making such a large move from Los Angeles to the UK is not a simple task, and I'm sure many people decided that it was time to move on and find a different studio closer to their own home. It might be a bit of a cynical take, but that might have actually just been the goal in the first place. After all, the entire gaming industry right now is suffering a post-COVID boom contraction, and so CIG not being an exception is not too much of a surprise. If you've been following their funding, they barely eked out passing their previous year's funding, and that's after a studio acquisition and probably nearly doubling their studio's payroll. Worse though is that this year is looking to be even lower than the last two, which is not a great sign, but they still have some time to make up ground. Chris then directly addressed a rather major departure of Todd Pappy, who had worked for CIG as the director for Star Citizen's Persistent Universe for nearly 9 years. He explains that Todd Pappy had to leave the UK studio and return to the US due to family reasons, and that Chris later determined that remote management would be too difficult and decided to let Todd go. Chris then went on to wish him well for his future ventures, but I imagine that this departure was not easy for either party. But while this may not be the most positive of news, at least there's a bright future for Star Citizen based on what Chris said about Star Citizen 1.0 and its full release. One of the biggest questions I've ever had, aside from when is Star Citizen coming out, is what a Star Citizen 1.0 release even looks like. It looks like we're finally going to get an answer. Chris began this section by stating that for him, there's no definitive finish line for an online MMO, and that they would be looking to add new features and content for many, many years to come. But then Chris begins to talk about what he envisions for a Star Citizen 1.0 release, which is what they consider to be a point where features and content present a commercial release. This means that the game is then welcoming to new players, stable and polished with enough gameplay and content to engage players continuously. In other words, when it is no longer considered to be an alpha or an early access. However, he doesn't go any further about the specifics of this just yet, but later promises that a new roadmap would come together and better define this vision later this year. He then talks about how they have been recently spending time talking about what a 1.0 release would look like and what it would take to get there. To help realize this vision, CIG veteran Rich Tyrer will be taking a new role called Senior Game Director. Later in the letter, Chris expands that Rich was formerly the game director of Squadron 42 and played a crucial role in getting it to its current status of feature complete. This wasn't said in the letter, but Rich then replaces the outgoing Todd Pappy, who left after many years at CIG, which I just talked about. Rich then steps in to assuage concerns that this means that they're going back to the drawing board. Instead, he explains his focus has been on leveraging the merging of Squadron 42 and Star Citizen teams to reform the core groups of development into larger, more general teams that can be more flexible to address aspects of the game's development, as opposed to highly specialized strike teams as they've had up until recently. Speaking from some limited personal experience in game development, team assignments can silo developers into their own internal groups, which can feel disconnected from other teams aside from the regular large studio-wide progress meetings. This can be detrimental then to a team's efforts when they're bottlenecked by another siloed team's work who may be scheduled for completely different and entirely unrelated tasks. This change then will hopefully help deliver more features complete as opposed to the current now notorious implementation of V0 features, which more often than not turn out to be just a shell of their vision that take months or even years to fully realize. Rich then spoke though on some interesting specifics, such as the continued development of base building and crafting, something I was personally really worried about after Todd Pappy left, considering that this was his baby. So hopefully we'll very soon still get those very vital long-term resource sinks that will bring players together for shared and competing goals that is very different than the experience we have today. Rich then goes on to make a sort of promise, which in my view might come back to bite him, that we should expect to start seeing large updates every quarter moving forward, and that many changes to systems that have not been touched in a great deal of time will come to fruition, such as the economy and insurance features alongside appreciated quality of life features and improvements to things like inventory, missions, mobiGlass, coupled with completely brand new features and content. Rich then reiterated in this section that he's been working closely together with Chris Roberts to help develop their vision for Star Citizen 1.0 and that they would be presenting us with a new roadmap that we could see later this year for that vision. For some context here, while Star Citizen's release, specifically Squadron 42's release, has been announced and missed in the past, there's never ever really been a full complete vision given for what a Star Citizen commercial release would look like. We don't know then how many planets are going to be in this release, what kind of features we can expect, how many ships we can expect, what type of gameplay we can expect. All these things have been up in the air, and some speculated that many features that we have been looking forward to would get cut or something like that in order to just get the game out. While I can't speculate on what this vision is going to look like, I can say that I'm very excited to finally have more concrete answers about what we can look forward to, especially in the very near future. Making a roadmap means setting dates, and that means we can have a vision for when we're going to actually start to see Star Citizen become a game. I mean, at least become a game that you can play continuously every day like Chris said. Right now, it's definitely not that. At least for me and most people that I know, although I know some people do play it every day. I don't want to discount that some people have fun with the current game systems. Chris then engages in some self-deprecation, acknowledging that the project had taken much longer and has been more difficult than he anticipated 11.5 years ago. However, despite it all, he remains determined to finish strong. Finishing this section then, Chris looks forward to seeing us try 3.23 soon and reveals that an upcoming event involving Xenothreat would have an unprecedented and incredibly powerful in-game upgrade as a reward for completing all the tasks, which we now know is the F7A Mark II upgrade from the now released F7C Mark II. Unfortunately though, it looks like you'll have to buy the ship in order to get the upgrade, so we'll leave this for another video. So are you guys excited like I am for finally getting a vision for what a Star Citizen release looks like? And are you excited for all the server meshing testing going on this year and for the release of Pyro? Let me know down below what your thoughts are, and as always, I hope to see you guys in the next one.